I am here to advocate that we gang together to end a blatant case of egregious discrimination against one of the things that's closest to us. The injured party in this case are the technologies that we actually use. And so my primary message is this, that we spend as much or more time developing tools for social networks for the very technologies we use so that they can actually have a society themselves, as we spend as much time on that as we do of making social networks for people. It's simply the time for discrimination against technologies and their social networks has to end. I could go now, and that would be it. Okay, now why? I'm scared to hell. I'm really scared to hell, and I'm more scared to hell because of how well we are doing our job. And that's a really strange thing, that when you're doing well, you make things worse. Because where we optimize here, we just transfer some of the problems over there, and we don't actually know about it. So it's kind of like Charlie Chaplin in modern times. What do you do about the technology that becomes so complex you can no longer manage it? And it's about complexity that I'm talking about. And so, what do I mean by that? Well, here's what's going on. This is what I call God's law. It's a threshold of frustration, or the complexity barrier, above which anything that exists, even if you can demonstrate it, it doesn't exist in human terms. Now, around the time of the iPhone, we started to improve and be able to build things that were delightful, they were affordable, they worked really well, and they built a market and set a standard of design that you couldn't go back from. Great. And we got better and better. And so now we have, with the so-called Internet of Things and all these other things, we have devices and gadgets that are easy to use, they're affordable, they're desirable, they work, all these things are great. And that just makes the problem worse. The reason is that the cumulative complexity of a bunch of delightful, wonderful, affordable, available things still brings you up above the threshold as the collective, not because of the individual devices and technologies and services. And so the question is, you may be able to use any one of them, but your ecosystem becomes overwhelming. Just count how many USB devices you have to plug in every night, and you start to see even a low-level point of friction. Now, there's two parts to this, and one is simply the more things we put out there, no matter how good they are, the bigger that we're just accelerating the problem. But it's even exacerbated because of this other aspect of things, is mobility. There's lots of things people say about how technology's evolved, and things are smaller, faster, cheaper, there's more of them, they're networking, bandwidth, and all that. Those are all technocentric descriptions of where technology's been going. And frankly, for me, that's just utilitarian. The only technology I care about is the human being. And then everything else has to serve that. And what has really changed is who's doing what, where, when, why, and with whom, and for how much, and why. And that inherently ties into this notion of mobility. When I say mobile and mobile first and stuff like that, I don't mean any phone. I mean it's the mobility of the human activity. And we're constantly, almost everything we do in our daily life is a compound task. It's a bunch of aggregates stacked together where you have to get things going. So just as the iPhone brought flow onto the device at the micro level, now I want flow to my life and not have to go into like app hopping to plan my rate to get from one lily pad to another, but by the time I get to the 10th lily pad of apps to do what I want to do, I'm just pissed off. How do we get that friction out of there? So what I'm about to say, because everybody's into accelerators and incubators and wants to be a millionaire by the time they're 24 by doing the next big thing. So let me tell you what I think about the next big thing. There's no such thing as the next big thing. In fact, chasing the next big thing is what is causing the problem. And the next big thing isn't the thing. The next big thing is a change in the relationship amongst the things that are already there. Societies don't transform by making new things, but by having their internal relationships change and develop. And I'd argue that what we know about sociology and how we think about things like kinship, moral order, social mores, conventions, approach, departure, all of those things that we know about and have a language from social science apply equally to the technologies that we must start making. And if we don't have that into our mindset, we're just going to make a bunch of gadgets, a bunch of doodads, as opposed to build an ecosystem that's worthy of human aspirations and technological potential. So let me tell you about the rot in our system. Now you might be wondering, what the hell's this rot? Well, it's the precedent for the Internet of Things. It's the road net of things. So we live in eburbia, and so you take this shot, that represents the internet. By the way, if I make fun of the Internet of Things, I just want to ask what else has ever been connected to the internet other than things? We have always had an Internet of Things. But what you call the Internet of Things just says there's a bunch more crap going on to the internet to make the problems that were always there worse. Like here, everybody has a backyard. They're fenced. Nobody knows their neighbors. They don't have keys to each other's place. There is no sense of community. There is no sense of culture. These are a bunch of isolated things. You do have token area network. You can see the cars or the tokens, and you've got the data inside. But the fact is, do not confuse things being connected with them being communicated with communicating, and don't confuse communication with building out culture. And which of those is important? Yes, connectivity is essential. It's not sufficient. Communication, essential, not sufficient. You have to aim for the higher level. And we've got a language to do that. So if you imagine, like, in my compound life, when I'm going through a task where the shopping or getting the groceries for the checkout counter to the car, I'm going down the circular path, for example. But I'd argue that every place as I walk through that ecosystem in the age of ubiquitous computing, that I want that at every point as I go through, I want to have any technological resource in that space, social space, physical space, cultural space. I want any technology that's available there to be able to know that I'm there and to lend a hand to its best of its abilities, or not interfere because it's only got the worst of abilities, to enhance my task, and I want that to happen transparently. We can't do that. So I would argue that if you were thinking about doing a new application, a new device, or even a new service, that you follow these following rules. And the rule one is every new product and service must provide great experience and excellent value. They have to work, they have to flow, and they have to generate demand. That's just a given. Nobody's going to question that. And post-iPhone, I would argue every new product must work seamlessly with others within the ecosystem that it functions. That we aren't doing, except with a few exceptions, which are, in fact, wonderful and prove my point, and I'll talk about that. But even that is not enough. It's not just things have to work together seamlessly, but they must, in so doing, every new thing that you add to the ecosystem must, A, bring not only the value it brings inherently on its own, it must bring value, increased value to every other thing in your ecosystem, and furthermore, everything you add must also reduce complexity of everything else in your ecosystem, and it. So more of the right technology with the right relationship means less complexity. And by the way, those changes, less or more, I want that to be geometric. I don't want that to be arithmetic. Now, you say, well, okay, this guy's obviously bonkers. He doesn't know what the hell, what's going on. He's old. Get out. Make room for the young guys. No, listen. The only advantage of being old is that you don't have to extrapolate from a point because you're not a beginner. I can extrapolate from 40 years. So it's easier to extrapolate from a line and get a good prediction of the future than from a point. It's the best I can offer to excuse my age. But the point here is, your car is your most expensive computer. You have a $30,000 car or €30,000 car, you just bought a €10,000 computer. And you don't even know what the operating system is. Now the point is that watch what happens. It's really interesting. I throw my handset onto the passenger seat. I'm driving down the freeway talking to you. While I'm doing so, because I've got Bluetooth in my car, the question is, where is the phone? And if you're listening to me so far, you'll understand that's a totally bogus question. The only real answer is yes. It doesn't matter. It's not about the phone or everywhere. But you cannot distinguish where the phone is because 90% or only the handset is only providing 5 to 10% of the technology locally managing that call. The SIM chip, the Bluetooth chip, battery, and a little bit of logic. Everything else, the speech recognition, the speaker, the microphone are all in the car. And you cannot separate the two. They are joined at the hip, and it works so well you don't even pay attention to it. So you get a 90% change in technology when you're driving there compared to the handset alone. And it's even better than that because you have a 100% change in interaction language. If you are not using pure speech while you're driving a car, you should lose your driver's license. And yet the minute you get out of the car, and this is the wonderful thing, you pick up the handset in the middle of the conversation, and immediately 90% of the technology changes, 100% of the interaction language changes, and because of those radical changes, discontinuities, you have complete continuity of conversation. And it works so well you don't even notice it happens. And that comes back to this whole notion, great technology is that which is like magic, you don't even notice it. So if you are a great designer, be prepared to be anonymous because nobody's going to notice it because everybody just think, well, this is natural, this is the way it should be. There's no creativity there. But let's extend that example to the longer compound sentence, and let's work backwards. I started out in this meeting with Skype and got all these people with other people, and now I want to just, as I walk out of the room, just do with one button push or something like that, I want to be able to join, like transfer that conversation, that meeting, to my handset so I can walk along like this and to my car, start the car, throw it down on the passenger seat, and be able to keep in the meeting, driving to my next meeting. The point is that complete continuity of social space. So I'm remaining in the same social space, using the best technology available in the multiple physical contexts where I am being mobile through in order to just live my life with the least amount of impedance mismatch and the maximum amount of effectiveness and distraction. And what's happening there is that just like in that, and the metaphoric map of going around the Netherlands, there's always what happens on your car, that everything is handed off to cell phone towers. Now imagine that the same thing happens in the things that are embedded in the environment. They're in my pocket, in my office, when I get down to go to the living room or dining room. It's the same happens, except it's not cell phone towers I'm handing off to and having the resources all channeled. You just take that same type of concept so that I can, in fact, be mobile, and all of my activities can be mobile as I transform the space. And understand there's a word called ubiety, which is the close cousin of ubiquity that is sort of like, it doesn't mean everything's everywhere all the time. Rather, it says the right thing at the right place at the right point at the right price for the right person, the right task. And so we start to have personalized spaces which are set up much like you have a kitchen and a dining room and a toilet. You have areas that are specialized for certain types of functions. And our lives are like that. So let's have the technologies deployed in accordance to that so that the right thing's there. And then when as I move into that, it's called handed off and I can keep going. So if you're going to do this at a technological level, what's required is that you have to think from day one, from your architecture, that you can have this seamless aggregation and disaggregation of the various components. Like, again, they could be services, they could be your applications, they could be your hardware. But you need this seamlessness of where they aggregate and they disaggregate without any problems. Now notice, at the same time, from the functionality, from the user-facing side of things, as opposed to out in the back end, you need this graceful augmentation and degradation of capabilities and functionality that go with that. And it's really important. It's easy to imagine that when I bring things together, I get more functionality. And it's easy to imagine that you get, as I take technologies away, that things degrade. But actually, that would be the wrong thing, because that would lead to, as I add things, I just get more and more complexity in them, right back to my earlier graph. So what happens here is that you actually, it's sort of like the god of the net, of the social network, giveth and taketh away in an appropriate way. So notice, if you have used your mobile in your car using Bluetooth, you probably have never complained that you can't play Angry Birds while you're driving, or that you can't do a spreadsheet, because it violates the moral order of the place. Right? And so you have to understand that. So if you understand the moral order, then you know what to leave out, and that way, that's how you keep the complexity wrapped under control. And so this notion of what you bring. And on the other hand, when you're in the car, you augment the capabilities for speech and speaker on the phone. Now, what's really important in this is it comes back to this whole notion of mobility. We are ambient. We are mobile. We have. As we go through this space and transfer from the social, even if you came on stage with me, that would put me in a different place, right? It could be social space when I'm talking about your body. But all those transitions, we have to think about and manage them with the same kind of care an animator would or a game designer would when they're making things move and things, except this is real life. We're animating our life, and we're animating the behaviors of the technologies. And because of these technologies, every camera, every microphone, all these things within the sensor networks and so on, give us techniques to hopefully in an appropriate manner in terms of privacy, but they give us the means to make better judgments. But basically, here's the deal. The door at the supermarket that opens for you because it knows it's a supermarket and your arms are probably full of groceries or you've got a cart, when it opens, that is a beautiful example of adaptive technology, and it's a one-bit computer without any memory that opens that door, but that door knows by its placement that it's not at a bank vault. And so it's this kind of thing. Simple technologies in the right place. They don't even have to be on the network, except the walking network as opposed to the internet. And this other part is that it's critical to pay attention not only to enable technologically these transitions in a seamless way, they really have to have the same types of aesthetic, emotional qualities that make things feel normal and human. Remember, the thing that the iPhone did, it didn't bring multi-touch. Hell, we were doing multi-touch in 1984. With capacitive multi-touch. That wasn't what made it work. What made it work was it was the first digital device that had an analog interface and let you stroke, caress, brush. It was the transitions. That's where it was. The functionality was the same as everything else that was out there. But that was the essence. It was the interaction part of the design. It wasn't the graphics. It wasn't the industrial design. Those were all beautiful lollipops in fashion. But the real thing of the experience was the feel, the input. Which isn't visible, but which grabs your heart and grabs your soul in the most positive ways when it's well done. So let's take an example right now. We've got all these things on this. Here's this guy. He's coming off a plane. He's going to come down the corridor. He's trying to get to someplace. Actually, he's coming off the train at King's Cross going to University College London. And he's set down. He doesn't know how to get there because it's a rabbit's warren there. He's coming along, and he's going to walk all the way like this. The GPS stuff works. The turn-by-turn instructions for pedestrians, they work. Some of you have used it this week in Amsterdam. That's great. But while you're doing that, you can't talk to anybody else. You're probably getting run over by a car because you're so busy looking for the names. And the point is that it's a foreground intentional action that really interferes with any other thing. I can't hold a conversation with you, which I haven't met, but that would be my opportunity because we're walking the same place. But I'm buried here. Now, here's the point. Do you know this guy? We all know that guy. None of us like this guy. We hate walking behind them coming out of the train station. Are you this guy? And absolutely, we all are. We do it reluctantly because there's no other option available that we have to walk around to the face. But basically, it also says that, hey, I'm a tourist. I don't know where I'm going. Here's a really expensive phone. Do you want to grab it? Just pull it out of my hands. But also, how can I be cool? I can't be cool. So that really pisses me off, too. And the point that's really neat around here is I have no brand loyalty whatsoever to the companies or the technology companies that deliver that capability, as much as I rely upon that capability. The second somebody comes out and lets me have that capability without becoming that guy, you're mine. I'm your customer. You have me forever. And the point is, it's not natural. And even more, there is nothing I can think of that you can do on the device alone, in hardware, software, or anything, that lets you not be that guy. I want to be able to walk where I'm going, to talk to the person I'm with, and be able to look at St. Pancras architecture and say, wow, that's just the most amazing train station I've ever seen in my life. I hate being that guy, and yet that's where we are. Now, how do you fix it? There's lots of different ways, but I'll give you one example. This is a project I've been working on for the last 2 years. It's called the Guide Dog Project. We're doing with the guide dogs in the UK. And what we've really done is we've taken people who are blind, fully blind, and using either a white cane or a dog, and just saying, how do you make them so they're not that guy? Because they can't even see. And so here's the statistics. 68% about of totally blind people in the United Kingdom never leave home alone. Those that do are called independent travelers, and they typically have about 8 routes that they've learned, maybe up to 3 months to learn the route, and that they have to stick to those routes. This is really, oh, by the way, the same number of people who don't never go out is the same statistic of how many people are unemployed of that same population. So what we've done is we're still using the phone, we're still using the cloud, but we've got a set of, in this case, bone conduction headphones that we cobbled up and put an IMU in the back of the headset to tie this stuff together, put the localization, and then we're using HRTFs, which are ways that you can put spatial audio out into the space around you, so that as you're walking, you can basically have this beep thing that leads you along. We use non-speech audio for that cue so that it doesn't interfere with the speech processing part of the brain, so I can still, without task interference, hold a conversation. I'm not blind, I have never been blind, and yet within 5 minutes, totally blindfolded, given a cane and told to walk through the town of Reading, I could make the route independently, and so that shows you right away. And we're at a point now after the second year where we can take blind people who've never been to Reading before, put them in the town, and say, we'll meet you at the train station, and they can get there on their own. Yes, we do follow them in case we don't want to kill anybody. But the point is that technology becomes transparent. You've reduced complexity, you've added value, and by the way, if you are in China and you don't read Chinese and you're trying to get to someplace on foot, you are also blind. And this would do it because you could do translation and so on with the technology. So here's what I want to leave you with. An exercise of imagination. And it's this thing, what if stuff just worked? What if you could just get on the network? You didn't have to go 5 times. Every time you go in the hotel room, you have to go back on. What if it just worked? What if things just worked together? What if they worked together seamlessly? And what if you did so with an overall reduction in complexity and an increase in value? Talk about big things. Is there anything you could think of doing, even with the repertoire of things we have today, that would be bigger and have more impact than just that? And that's what I have to say. Now, the deal here is we live in this world. I'm a climber. This is a friend of mine, Marco, took the shot. And it's just spectacular. This is what we have. I don't want to abuse it. We can do anything. We can now do anything. That's why right now, compared to 40 years ago when I started, 45 years ago when I started, all we could do is say, God, this thing actually kind of works. Now you can do anything. And the fundamental question as a community we have to ask ourselves is, now that we can do anything, what should we do? And that's the most powerful thing that we as a community can have. And it's also, as Uncle Ben said to Spider-Man, it's the greatest responsibility as well. With that, I say thank you and good luck. Change the world.